Hello everybody from Maine to California. This is the DisneyChris.com update. Hi, how's everybody doing? I have a lot to report on for this update. It's August 25th, 2017. And even though since my last update 2 weeks ago, I have not added a lot of new audio tracks, I have been incredibly busy working on my website, and one of the big things that I did was I reconfigured and redid my entire index page, which is a master list of every track included in the Disneyland Audio Tour. The reason I did this was two reasons. First of all, there was a lot of extra residual HTML code, which is technical speak for the thingies that make you see what you see on the web page. It's the technical coding that you use to program a website. There was a lot of extra unneeded information in the coding, so I went through, and with the help of my nephew, who is a 15-year-old computer genius, I was able to fix the issues. So because the problem was the page was loading very slowly. So now the page pretty much pops up instantly. All that extra coding has been taken away. And another problem is that although it looked beautiful on my main go-to web browser, which is Firefox, if you used a Chrome, which a lot of people prefer Chrome, there was an issue with some of the images bleeding off the page. So I went through and fixed all those issues so that everything looks nice and pretty on Chrome as well as Firefox. So check out the revamped, redone index page. That took me several days to fix. It's not as easy as it sounds, because I had to deal with some HTML code, and it's not something I'm very familiar with, so I had to kind of figure out how to do some certain things to make the page look the way I wanted it to look, and it wasn't very easy for me to figure it out, but I did it, and I'm happy with the results. So that's the first thing that I worked on. Second of all, you all, if you've been following what I've been doing, you know that I've been working pretty much exclusively on my Disneyland After Dark chapter. Well, I really felt in the back of my mind that the chapter was kind of getting out of control because I was pushing 145 tracks on this chapter, and I try to keep the chapters around 80 to 100 tracks at the most. So I really was thinking, you know, this chapter needs to be split up. But I couldn't figure out how to split it up. So a thought wave, a brainstorm popped into my head and said, hey, I know how to split up the chapter. I can split it up by having the Disneyland After Dark chapter be about all of the shows and fireworks and just basic, you know, things that happen at Disneyland After Dark, but then I can create a separate chapter for all the live bands at Disneyland After Dark. So instead of having all of those live bands on this chapter, I split it up and created a brand new chapter that just pretty much, with a couple exceptions, features all of the live bands that performed in Disneyland After Dark. And here is the new chapter. Here's my little Mickey Mouse mascot. He's a little 50s dancing guy here. And here is the chapter I call this the title card. That's my little technical name for this little thing that you see on every page. So, let me go through and explain this chapter to you. First of all, this track that's coming soon is going to include all the advertisements from the 50s that promoted Carnation Plaza Gardens, which includes 2 date night and Disneyland ads, and then what's called the Soda Time Dance ad. I still need to redo this, so it's coming soon. These are all, this date night, Plantation House, those are carryovers from when it was on Disneyland After Dark. And then the entire Tomorrowland Bandstand section that was part of Disneyland After Dark has been moved over to this chapter. It's pretty much exactly what it was before, except I've added 1 new track, which is this one, Bernie Bernard and his orchestra. This is from an album. I still need to add it onto the page, so it's coming soon. This is from an album that was recorded at the Disneyland Hotel on a New Year's Eve, and I decided to include it in this section because it's from the same era as all this other stuff, and it's the same type of music, so I kind of want to include it. Dixieland and Disneyland is the same, except I've taken out the Walt Disney Introduction, which was the first track, and I'm only going to include that on the Disneyland After Dark chapter. I'll explain that when I pop back over there and explain that chapter to you, but this is what was there before, exactly what was there before, with that one exception. Disneyland A Go-Go, I decided to put this track, which was separated, and before it was earlier on the page, higher up on the page. I decided to incorporate this space bar with Annette and Bobby Rydell into this section, Disneyland A Go-Go. And other than that, it's exactly what was there before. Tomorrowland After Dark, I removed a track that was a couple of commercial ads for different live groups, but that's on the other chapter, so you still can listen to it. It's just not part of this, because I tried to keep this pretty much as possible to just live groups and not other things. All the other things will be on the other chapter. There are a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's kind of my philosophy with this chapter. Okay, so the big bands in Disneyland is exactly the same. I still, of course, have to work on all of these tracks, but I did not make any changes to this section. All of these tracks, these Grad Night and Videopolis tracks, these are the same, except there was an introduction that I had before the first 80s Grad Night. I'm not going to include that on this chapter, but I am including it on the other chapter, so that's not here anymore. Swing bands in Disneyland, same exact thing as before. And Tomorrowland Terrace, same exact thing as before. And I should mention that although I have not added many new tracks, I have added several new tracks to this section since the last update, which includes all of these that are marked new. Club Buzz Sandbox, Hard Day's Night, 80s All-Stars, Barrage, Stellar Show Band, The Suffragettes, Instant Replay. And I just have 4 more left to do for this section, and this section will be completed. So that is something that I did work on as far as adding new audio since the last update. So I did add a few new things, but not as much as I had originally thought I would, and when I started getting wrapped up in other areas. Okay, so this track used to be sandwiched with the Tomorrowland Terrace section, the Grad Night Dance Party, but I decided to separate it as its own thing because it is a little bit different, because these are all live groups and this is a DJ mix. And this is newly added since the last update. This is something I recently posted about a week ago. So that's basically what's going on with the new chapter. I did rearrange the hub, welcome to the hub, at the bottom of each page, so that it now has the Disneyland Bandstand. I sort of rearranged this section down here a little bit to squeeze in the new chapter. So you're able to navigate this. It looks like this on every page now. You're able to navigate to the Disneyland Bandstand chapter from every page. And with that, I should mention, before I get on to the revitalized, redone Disneyland After Dark chapter, I should mention that adding in this new chapter and all that entailed took me several days of long, hard work to do, because I had to rearrange all the folders, because squeezing in a new chapter, I had to bump up everything as far as the numbering. Like, originally there were 25 chapters, now there are 26, so I had to change all the names of every single image, every single MP3 file. I had to rename everything to reflect the new chapter number, because what was chapter 22 is now chapter 23. What was chapter 23 is now chapter 24. That took forever to redo. I also had to create all the artwork and everything for this page, and select new pictures for everything. So a lot of work involved in squeezing in another chapter, and that was another reason why I was reluctant to do it, but I finally just figured it has to be done, especially because, as I'll show you on the other chapter in a second, I came up with even more things that I wanted to add. So now it was going to get even more ridiculous. It was going to be like over 150 tracks, and it was just getting out of hand. It really needed to be split up. So anyway, let me go over the new Disneyland After Dark chapter. Now, I did include representative tracks for all of these different things that you see on this page, the Disneyland Bandstand page. But instead of having every individual artist as its own track, I'm going to make mixes that take the best of each artist and put it all on one track as like an hour-long mix of everything. So basically, if you want to hear the individual artists, you go to this chapter, Disneyland Bandstand. If you just want an overall overview of different things, then you go to Disneyland After Dark. So the first 4 tracks are the same. And then I decided to add in a new section called Main Street After Dark. And I'm going to add in the song Meet Me Down on Main Street, which, because it says we've got a date tonight at 8, so it kind of talks about nighttime a little bit in that song, so I wanted to add in that song. The evening area music is already something that's been on the site. And then I'm going to add in, I already have had the Coke Corner Pianist as a track, but I also want to add in the Dapper Dans and the Saxophone Quartet, because all 3 of these groups, they may not do it anymore. I know the Coke Corner Pianist plays at night, but traditionally the Dapper Dans and the Sax Quartet have performed at night in the parks, as well as during the day, but they're also known for having performed at night. So I wanted to add in that, and I just figured all this has to do with Main Street, so I'll add a little just Main Street section. So that's that. Date night at Disneyland and date night with the Elliott Brothers, these are the same as what was on the track before. Now, I should mention that this track is going to be an exact duplicate of what is on the Disneyland Bandstand chapter. There are a couple of tracks that I just felt needed to be placed on both pages, because they're so important to they're important to the history of Disneyland After Dark. You can't have a Disneyland After Dark chapter without the Elliott brothers. They're central to the history of it. But it's also a live band that performed in the park, so it really fits both categories very strongly. So I really had to include it on both pages, and I'll tell you a couple others that I duplicated as well, but there aren't that many, just a couple. Fantasy in the Sky is the same. Now, I decided that I wanted to add a mixture of all of the different segments from the Wonderful World of Color episode, Disneyland After Dark, the 1962 episode. And I do have all of the different segments separated and posted on my Disneyland and TV Land chapter. But I want to create a version that has all of the different segments of the program all combined together. And I'm going to post it here. So that's what this is. Cavalcade of Big Bands is another duplicate of what is on the Disneyland Bandstand page. And what the Cavalcade of Big Bands is it's an overview of all the different bands that played at the Disneyland, at the Tomorrowland Bandstand and whatnot. So, because it's like an overview and encompasses the whole thing, I wanted to also include it on this page. Now, I had mentioned that I removed the Dixieland and Disneyland introduction. Well, I've placed it here, so now this is part of it. And then this track that is also on this page, where is it? Guest stars. Special guest stars, it's this track right here. I've decided to include that again as an overview of the whole Dixieland and Disneyland event, and I'm calling it Delta of the River Stage because they did set up a special stage, which you can see pictured here. It was actually designed by Raleigh Crump, believe it or not, and I just kind of wanted to represent this more as a show, like a live show, and less as a live band. So I'm differentiating it here because here it's being represented as all the live bands. Even though it's the exact same track, it's being represented as all the live bands. Here it's being represented as a live stage show, which it kind of was both things, so that's why I'm doing that. Firehouse 5 plus 2, again, central to the history of the park. You can't have a Disneyland After Dark chapter without including them. So I do have a Firehouse 5 track on my Disneyland After Dark chapter right here. on my Disneyland Bandstand chapter, but I'm also going to include it in the Disneyland After Dark. However, it's going to be different. This version, I'm going to have the live album, the Firehouse 5 in Disneyland album. Here, it's not the live album, it's cuts from some of their other albums. So this version will be different than the version on the Disneyland Bandstand. I'm going to add the music from the album Moonlight Time in Old Hawaii, because it's called Moonlight Time, so get it, After Dark. So I wanted to add that in. And then it's kind of going to be the lead-in to the Tahitian Terrace, so it kind of goes together nicely. Then these tracks were there before. Three Cute Lasses, Clara Ward Singers, Yachtsman Quartet. Of course, you'll remember my Hootenanny track, Spring Fling. And Spring Fling, I'm going to add in, this is what I'm going to use to create my overview mix, which will incorporate all of this Disneyland A Go Go music as like a mix, like a best of compilation. I'm going to put that in with my Spring Fling. That's why, even though it was on the site before, now it's marked as coming soon, because I'm going to redo this and make it, the ad will be the lead-in to all of the music. So this is going to get expanded. These were there before. This Disneyland After Dark is from the from Pirates of the Caribbean to the World of Tomorrow episode. That you may be familiar with. Now, something else that I was thinking about adding, and one of the reasons why I split the chapters up, because I was going to add it, is the album New Year's Eve in Disneyland, because it's got so many of the live performers who performed in the park after dark, and it's like again, this is like an overview. That's why it's on this chapter rather than this chapter. It's an overview of a lot of the live performers that performed in the park. And even though it's already on my Disneyland Records chapter, it really also belongs in the Disneyland After Dark page. So I'm adding that in. Tomorrowland Stage, Country Music Jubilee, Great American Music Machine. Those were all there before. Now, I placed this track here, the Disneyland Entertainment Experience, because basically this is Jack Wagner introducing a bunch of the live events that take place in Disneyland After Dark. And the tracks that follow this all are mentioned in this little promotional audio here. So this track plays, and then everything following it up to a point where I move on to other areas. It is all stuff mentioned in this promotional audio. I decided to put all of my Main Street Electrical Parade stuff into a little section instead of having everything separate, because all of the verbiage, my little notes that I put in for everything was very repetitive, and I was just like trying to come up with another way to say the same thing over and over again. And it really, there's a lot of tracks for this section, so it really belonged as like a little section rather than a separated like all these are up here. So this is now the same exact audio, but it's just in a little bit different, presented in a little bit different format. Following that, we have 3 versions of Fantasy in the Sky. I think these are in the wrong order. I need to fix this. I've got 83 followed by 80. I'll fix that after I'm done recording. Then we have that commercial that I mentioned that I took away from this from the other chapter. I put that here. And this sort of mentions some of the Tomorrowland stuff that happened in the park in the 70s. So following that, I have 2 of the groups that performed in the park around that time following this. So this is kind of a lead into that. Again, these 2 tracks here, Papa Do Run Run and Space Stage Helix, these are also on the Disneyland Bandstand chapter, but because Papa Do Run Run is a major like staple of Disney live entertainment for decades, they need to be represented on this chapter. And the Space Stage, the Helix, is such a unique and interesting part of the history of Disneyland that it's such a unique show with a unique thing about it that I just wanted to include it on both chapters because it kind of fits the theme of both chapters. I need to fix this. I'm not completely finished redoing these chapters. I still have a little bit of work left to do. So that's why you notice a few mistakes, and you'll also notice that these notes have nothing to do with what the track is, because it's just I still need to write a lot of the notes for the new things I've added. So this is like not what it's gonna say. It's temporarily there just to so you can see what it's going to look like. I'm going to rewrite all of these things, so don't worry about that. Now, again, mentioned in that Jack Wagner preview is something I didn't even think of adding before, but Bear Country used to have nighttime hoedown shows in Bear Country, and yeah, that's something that definitely should be included in Disneyland After Dark, so I'm going to add that to this chapter. Rolling River Review, because this is kind of country music, and then Rolling River Review kind of has a little bit of that same feel to it, country music feel to it. I'm going to add, I wanted the Bear Country Hoedown to lead into the Rolling River Review. And then, this is nice, I had mentioned a while back that I was looking for the names of the performers who performed at the Rolling River Review, and lo and behold, I got a list of all the performers who performed at the Rolling River Review. This is Pearl Bailey, by the way. She's one of them. Thanks, big shout-outs go to Jim Hill of the Disney Dish, because he did a podcast episode where he talked about the history of Fantasmic, and he went through a rundown of all of the performers who performed at the Rolling River Review. So thanks to him, I'm now going to be able to add in a new track that will have all of those performers. Just to give you a heads up on some of the performers that were there. Frankie Avalon, Jan and Dean, Patty Page, Buddy Rich, Spyro Gyro, Jose Feliciano, Kool and the Gang, Papa Do Run Run. Again, they're big players with Disney in that time period. Leon Russell, Earl Scruggs, Pearl Bailey, and Pete Fountain. There are a couple others that he didn't have the names of, so I'm not going to be able to include that. But that's pretty much the majority of the performers, so I'm going to make a really interesting and very eclectic mix of all the performers. Big Bands in Disneyland, what I'm going to do for this track is I'm going to include the lead-in music, the title, main title of the Big Bands in Disneyland TV show. That's going to kick off the track, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one song from each of these groups that performed at Big Bands in Disneyland and create a mix with one song from each group, from each band. But the difference is the version on this page, the bandstand, is going to be the audio directly from the TV show. But the version on this chapter is going to be studio recorded versions of songs performed by the same artists that performed on the TV show. So, similar but different for that one. Disneyland Grad Night, what I'm going to do for this, again, I'm going to create a best of version of a lot of the groups that performed in the park. So instead of having a 1 hour track for the first half of the 80s and a 1 hour track for the second half of the 80s, and then this live on stage all-star performances track, which is another hour and a half, I'm going to take the best of from all three of these mixes and create a mix that just kind of is an overview of all three of those. So that's what this is going to be. Videopolis Dance Party is going to be exactly the same as what is currently there. I don't know why I marked it as coming soon. That's a mistake. I have to fix that, but I'll put the track in. That's not going to change. So all of these tracks are the same as what was on the chapter before. I moved Fantasy in the Sky. It was originally further down on the page, but I moved it up here just to keep things a little more cohesive as far as timeline goes, because I'm loosely trying to keep things in sort of a chronological order. And before, this track was a little bit out of sync with the chronology, so I kind of bumped it up into this spot. Big Thunder Barbecue, Jambalaya Jazz Band, Rivers of America, Phantasmic Announcements. All of these tracks are what was there before. Light Magic, all that was the same. Again, with the swing bands in Disneyland, I'm going to create a mix that encompasses the best of all the artists that performed. So if you want to hear a track that covers each individual group, go to this chapter. But if you want to hear an overview of all the different artists, one song from each artist, it's going to be represented here. All of these fireworks shows were on the chapter before. Nothing has changed. Now, Pixie Hollow Enchantment, I have the mix of the area background music, and there is also a series of live, like 7-minute, or maybe less than that, little shows where the water, the colors and the lights and the waterfalls do a little show. There's like several different versions, but I did not have access to the music for that, so I wasn't able to include it, unfortunately. But I have found a new contact person who actually has informed me that the music used in the Pixie Hollow Enchantment actually comes directly from the Tinkerbell movies. I guess they're direct-to-video, a series of direct-to-video films. And all of the music is not original. It's all from that series. And all that music is, of course, available on CD or digital download or whatever. It's all been officially released. But the problem is we don't know what tracks were used. And when we've all, all of we audiophiles who do Disney stuff have tried to identify the songs through song identification software, everything comes up unidentifiable. However, this person that I have made contact with has informed me that he has a list of all of the music that was used, and he's going to get me that list. He hasn't gotten it to me yet because he has to find it. But he has access to that, so he's going to share that with me so that I will be able to replicate the music from the show. So that's exciting. Hopefully he'll follow through with that, and I'll be able to add that. So that's what's going on with this. Tomorrowland Terrace, again, this is something that I'm going to take all of these individual artists that are listed here and create a mix of everything. Basically one song from each group. So that's what's going on with that. Now, all of these tracks were there before. And I decided to move the 2017 version of the Main Street Electrical Parade to the end of the chapter to keep things more chronological. I originally had it at the end of the chapter, then I bumped it back up to be next to the original Electrical Parade, but I've decided to bump it back down again, and the reason for that is, without all those artists and everything on the page, it just somehow makes more sense to stick more with the idea of chronological order rather than have it be out of sync, just to have everything in one grouping, especially since I grouped the Electrical Parade now as a grouping instead of individual tracks like I had it before. Same thing goes with the Phantasmic 2017. I decided to have it be at the end of the chapter in chronological order. So after that, we have some of the little goodbye things, announcements and whatnot. Those were all there before. And that is the new chapter. Like I said, I still have work to do. It's not everything is completed, so you may notice if you check out these chapters in the next few days, some of the tracks might not play. Some of the, like I said, the liner notes might not make any sense because they're not properly, they haven't been rewritten yet and whatnot. So it's under construction, so just be patient with me, and hopefully, I'm hoping by tomorrow everything will be back on track and in order, and I can start adding new songs, new audio again. So just be patient, and if you can't play a track, try back in a few minutes. It's probably just temporary because I'm rearranging things. It doesn't mean the site is down or anything. It means things are under construction. So that's everything for this update. I hope everybody is having a wonderful summer, and I will talk to you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.